You see, all over the world, between different countries, within the same societies, at the national level, and sometimes at the provincial or state level, you always see a lot of noise and debate around the desirability of death penalty, its legitimacy, and if it serves any purpose, whether we should keep it, whether we should restore it, whether we should do away with it. So let's try and unpack this issue today because it resonates quite a bit. We all know death penalty means the job to criminals, usually murderers, and it's a way to keep law and order within the society. As we discussed, it's a lot more hotly debated than just locking someone up. Why? Well, because it's a massive deal. It's the most serious punishment out there, and once it's done, there's no undoing, there's no turning back. Globally, 35 countries are still on board with capital punishment, while over 100 have either kicked it to the curb or just stopped using it. In countries that still roll with the death penalty, the list of crimes that can land you in hot water includes kidnapping, drug trafficking, treason, murder, and sometimes some pretty shady moral or religious stuff. In the USA, 31 states plus the bigwigs in Washington and the military say yes to the death penalty. Now, some people who back the death penalty reckon it's fair game because murder is such a heinous crime that death is the only fitting response. Others argue that it is good for society, keeping things in check, and all such reasons. So, as I said, this video dives into both sides of the argument, as we always do, giving you the lowdown on why some folks are for it and why others are pushing back. When it comes to the death penalty, some folks argue it's not just about punishment, but about what's morally right. They believe that for really heinous crimes like murder, the only fitting response is execution. The idea is all about the moral side of things rather than just the practical. One angle is what you might call the payback approach. Is the idea that the punishment should fit the crime like for like. These folks argue that if you take a life, it's only fair that you lose yours. It's all about balancing the scales, making sure the punishment is as bad as the crime. This whole eye for an eye thing has been around for ages. Think of it as the ultimate what goes around comes around. Immanuel Kant was all for this in his book Metaphysics of Morals. Some go a step further, saying life is the ultimate value. Since murder snuffs out all the good stuff a person could have experienced or given, letting a murderer live, even behind bars, is letting them off too easy. Then there's the argument that some criminals are so beyond the pale, society just needs to wipe them out. We're talking about the worst of the worst here, like mass shooters. The idea is that such folks are such a stain on society. Keeping them alive is like society saying their horrific acts are somehow okay. Executing them is seen as a way to wash our hands of their crimes. People who think this way see execution as more than just an option. They see it as a moral must do. Unlike the payback crowd who think execution is fair play, these folks believe it's something society has to do. Now, some people back the death penalty not because they think it's the right payback for criminals, because they think it does more good than harm for society as a whole. There are two main points they bring up. One, they say, is pretty straightforward. If potential murderers think they will end up on death row, they might think twice before killing someone. The idea is that the fear of being executed can stop people from committing murder in the first place. The argument here is that the benefits, like saving innocent lives, outweigh the downsides, like the cost to the legal system and, well, ending someone's life. John Stuart Mill was all for the death penalty for this reason. While deterrence is all about cutting down murder rates in general, incapacitation is about making sure specific killers can do it again. Some murders might be so dangerous that the only way to be 100% sure they won't kill again is, well, to execute them. This point makes more sense in places that, for example, aren't the US, which has these super high-tech maximum security prisons. In these places, dangerous inmates are kept in solitary confinement and watched all the time. So in a place like the US, just locking them up might be enough to keep them from harming anyone else. And then there are countries where jails are broken, prisons can be breached, and the prisoners can be freed by their partners in crime or for other reasons. Now, so far for the death penalty. Now, let's view critically the moral arguments for the death penalty. So, let's break down some of the problems with the moral reasons that we discussed for the death penalty. First up, the whole eye for eye thing. It sounds straightforward, but think about it. If we really took it to heart, we'd be doing some pretty messed up stuff like raping rapists or torturing torturers, right? That doesn't sit right with most of us. Then there is the idea that punishment should match the crime. Some folks argue that the death penalty is overkill, and no pun intended. Why? Because a murderer not only loses their life but also suffers in prison and has to live with the knowledge of their execution date. The victim, on the other hand, they say, just loses their life. So for them, it's like the murderer is getting a harsher deal. A lot of critics say that life in prison is a more balanced punishment than execution. It's just as tough, but without the moral minefield of ending someone's life. And here is another thing. It's super tricky to figure out how much punishment fits a crime. Like, what's the right amount of jail time for armed robbery? A year? 2 years? 2 years and 100 days? It's a bit of a guessing game, and that's a big problem for the whole punishment should fit the crime idea. Now, let's get into the issues with those arguments that say the death penalty is good for society. First off, the whole deterrence idea, the thought is that the fear of being executed is a stronger deterrent than the fear of being locked up. But here is the catch. Researchers haven't found any solid proof that the death penalty actually stops more murders than just throwing someone in jail does. So the jury is still out on whether it really makes a difference. Plus, there's the cost factor. In the US, for example, executing a murderer is always more expensive than keeping them in prison for life. Yes. So, if execution isn't really stopping more crimes than life sentences, that's a lot of extra cash for no extra benefit. Another big issue with these theories is that they could end up punishing people for things they didn't do or for things they might do in the future. Like, imagine a situation where executing an innocent person could somehow prevent future murders. Under a pure deterrence approach, that might actually seem like a good idea, somewhat like trolley argument, especially if nobody ever found out the person was innocent. And what about less serious crimes? If executing a couple of burglars would wipe out property crime, does that mean we should do it? That's the kind of slippery slope you get with deterrence theories. Then there is incapacitation, the idea of executing someone to stop them from committing future crimes. But that is punishing people for things they haven't even done, not for what they have actually done. So in response, some folks have come up with two-level theories, which combine deterrence with the moral argument that the punishment should fit the crime. This approach tries to dodge the issue of punishing the innocent or for future crimes, but still has all the problems of the moral arguments we talked about before. Then there are quite a few other reasons people use against the death penalty. So let's very succinctly look at them. One argument is that executing someone stomps all over their basic right to stay alive. But then people who are pro death penalty fire back, saying that murderers have basically given up their right to live by taking someone else's life. Plus, they point out that if we say everyone has an absolute right to life, then what about self defense? That would mean you couldn't even defend yourself if your life was on the line. Then there is the dignity argument. It's all about respecting the basic human stuff in all of us, like being rational. Abolitionists say that executing someone wipes out their ability to be dignified, which makes it totally wrong. But death penalty supporters wonder if getting rid of someone's ability to do something, for example, practicing their religion, is the same as attacking that thing directly. So, is executing someone really the same as violating their religious freedom? Third issue, a big issue with the death penalty, is how it is carried out. Some folks are against it because the whole legal process leading to a death sentence is full of problems. They might be okay with the idea in theory, but not how it is actually done. When it comes to sentencing a murderer, it can feel like a roll of the dice. Some get the death penalty, others get life in prison, and there's no rhyme or reason why. That kind of randomness has people crying foul, calling it way too arbitrary. There is a disturbing trend where race of the victim and the murderer plays a role in who gets the death penalty. But that happens in other crimes also, but at least it doesn't take away someone's life. But yes, for example, kill a white person and you're more likely to end up on death row, especially if you're black. And if you're poor, good luck. The odds are stacked against you, especially when you can't afford a top-notch lawyer. Critics say this smells of racism and unfairness, and there's data to support it. Then death penalty defenders argue that what each murderer deserves should be looked at individually, and that these issues are a call to reform the system, not toss it out completely. The final big worry is that if you execute someone who is innocent or didn't get a fair trial, you can't undo that mistake. Some say that because a just government shouldn't be able to fix its biggest screw up, it shouldn't hand out punishments that can't be reversed. To some extent, I agree with that the state can take away what it can give. That's a solid argument. So, all right, folks, we have journeyed through the thorny debate of the death penalty, exploring the moral arguments, the practical reasons, and the big issues that have folks on both sides of the fence. Good folks, reasonable folks, well-meaning folks. Our job is to look at both sides of the argument. So we have looked at everything from the eye for an eye philosophy to the nuts and bolts of the arguments surrounding the death penalty and the troubling questions of fairness and costs it raises. But here's the thing, it's not a black and white issue. It's a complex, multi layered debate with solid arguments on both sides. So, what do you think? Is the death penalty a necessary tool for security and justice, or is it an outdated practice that we must leave behind? I encourage you to dive deeper, think critically, and form your own views on this crucial topic. Remember, the more informed we are, the better equipped we will be to make more informed and thoughtful decisions about the society we want to live in. The ball is in your court. What is your verdict on the death penalty? Think about it. Until then, goodbye. See you next time. Thank you.